Well, Dave, Valentine's Day is coming up, as you know.
As I know, I've been preparing for months.
But what you don't know is that Valentine's Day for the Geiger household has a lot of different meanings. There's a lot of things that happened on February 14th.
Are you being sincere, or is this a joke that's being played?
It is the truth. It is the truth.
It is the truth. Okay, all right.
I posted my very first comic on the web on a GeoCities site.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did.
The very first Greystone Inn went up on the web on February 14th, 2000. So
wow.
It's my anniversary of being an independent cartoonist is February 14th. So this will make it, 21 years that I've been doing this.
Wow, Brad, 21 years.
Yeah, which
That's
is
amazing.
kind of gobsmacking when you think about it.
Yeah, but, you found your love and you've kept at it. That's great.
And speaking of finding my love, the other big anniversary of Valentine's Day is that this is the day that I proposed marriage to Carolyn, my wife.
Wow,
Yeah.
really? You chose Valentine's Day?
Yeah, well, we had been living together for a couple of years at this point. Living in sin.
Bradley.
Much to my mother's dismay.
Bradley.
But we were kind of an old married couple after the second date. We just fell right in together.
You knew it was meant to be. Yeah.
And there was also, it was also kind of a... Not that I have to, explain myself, but it was also financially better for us to have just one apartment because we were both working in newspapers at the time. We were kind of, and kind of.
You don't need to explain why roommates work financially. People get it.
Work in a lot of ways, and financially is one of the many ways.
It turns out if you split the electrical bill, it's cheaper.
Yes.
No, keep going.
So I came home and I had bought her a really nice diamond ring, and of course I was not going to be the type that was gonna go out in public and get down on one knee with a flourish. And I came home and I had bought a dozen red roses, and I put the ring on the stem. So it was like down at the bottom.
Oh, did it slide down?
Not at the. It slid down. It wasn't up at the top. It was slid down to the bottom. So what happened? And I didn't know this. When I handed her these roses, she said, "Oh, that's very nice. Thank you. Happy Valentine's Day." And I said, "Yeah, but the roses. You really should look at the roses." And she says, "Oh, I see the roses. They're beautiful. Thank you.
They're very nice roses. Thanks." One typically looks at the tops of the roses.
Exactly. And I'm like, no. To get the full effects of the roses, you've got to take them out of the wrapping. We should put them in water. She says,
you need to see where and how they were cut. Were they at an angle or were they straight on? That's important.
Is it cut on the bias? Like what are we talking here? No. She's like, listen, we don't have to unwrap them. It's fine. Finally, this is our wedding proposal. I'm getting angry at her. I'm like, listen.
Oh, God.
Take the fucking roses out of the wrapping. And she's like, all right, fine. I'll take the roses out of the wrapping. Finally, she unwraps it, and this, little ring ting-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding falls out onto the dining room table. And that was our proposal.
No, it wasn't.
I said, and then I did.
You didn't say. Then you said, "Will you marry me?" And I love you.
Then I did get down on one knee, and I told her, listen, you're the best. You're wonderful. I can't imagine not spending the rest of my life with you. And she looked at me. I remember this with tears welling up in her eyes, and she said, "I think you only got 11 roses." I said, "No, that's a full dozen. Just look at the ring." She immediately goes to the phone, which at that point was on the wall. We used to have phones on the walls back in the day, and calls her parents immediately to say, "Hey, we're getting married. It's official." Right. And she says, "Dad, Brad proposed." His first words, I'm not making this up. Proposed what?
What a dad thing to say.
Not even like he was dead serious. Proposed what? She goes, proposed we go out for drinks tonight. No, he proposed marriage. And then, of course, it for the rest of the night, it was phone call after phone call to this friend of hers and that friend of hers. I just ended up, kind of sacking out on the couch and, waving from the side. But the rest of the night, if you've ever, it was probably like that for you too. Did Gloria do this thing where the rest of the next following week, she walked around with her hand in front of her face?
Well, no, it was a lot of phone calls. But my favorite part, I don't know that if I've ever told you this story. My favorite part from when I proposed to Glow, we were on Catalina Island, which is a little island off the coast of LA. It takes like an hour boat ride to get there. It's really small. And we were on a hill overlooking the bay. And the Bay of Catalina is famous because LA millionaires take their $40 million yachts and park it in the Bay of Catalina. Uh-huh. And somebody had what looked like, it was gigantic. It took like 4 spots. It was like a $100 million yacht. And it was blasting Frank Sinatra. So at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, we were up on a mountain trail by ourselves, and we were dancing to Frank Sinatra. And I spun her, and in the middle of the spin, I got down on one knee, and then I cracked the ring case. So by the time she came out of the spin, I was in the pose. And the part that I love to tell is she paused, looked at the box, and her hands went up to her face. Which means that, but what happened is by the time that her hands went up to her face, she already had the ring on her hand. So in the time that I was cracking open the box, she was like, ring, finger, hands up to the face. So by the time she went, it already had the ring up, in her face. And
from your perspective, it must have been like, oh my God, she's already engaged. Who beat me to the punch?
I suddenly thought, my God, I proposed to Barry Allen. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And Bradley J., what's our first topic for the day?
First topic for the day comes in from Patreon backer Brandon Heyman, who says, hey, Brad and Dave, I would love to hear your thoughts as to which approach to sharing work with an audience as well as building an audience is better when a published book is the ultimate end result.
Ooh, that was a long sentence. All right, keep going.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, and we'll unpack it as we go.
Okay, so they're saying the goal being, I know that I'm going to do a published book. Which of the following 2 methods is the way I should go, right? Okay.
Is it A, sharing your comic strip by strip and letting your audience read along, or is it B, sharing concepts, sketches, storyboards, and sneak peeks at the artwork leading up to the release of the final book? I myself initially found my audience by doing the former, but admit when it comes to other comic creators, I'm usually wait and read it all at once. Thanks for being one of the best sources of information and laughter when it comes to making comics, Brandon. So Dave, a published book is the final result. Now, I don't know whether that means a self-published book or whether he's using the modifier published book to indicate that he's publishing it through a publisher.
Oh, you know what? That could be, but the very fact that he's laying out this choice for himself tells me that he's self-publishing.
Yeah.
Or 99% is more likely to be self-publishing.
Because if he wasn't, the publisher would be telling him how he can or cannot do it. The publisher's like, here's
how you're going to do it, here's our schedule, here's our marketing release schedule, that kind of thing.
So, okay, so let's assume he's self-publishing at that regard. What he's saying is,
and I think we can also assume it's a long-form story, correct? It sounds like, because if it's a comic strip, obviously. Oh, he did say strip by strip.
He did say strip by strip. So then
we'll be more broad in our answers. But I will say this: I have seen in my career both avenues done successfully, but I lean very, very heavily towards the first rather than the second in terms of releasing them page by page or update by update rather than one big swing at the end. And I do it for 1,000 reasons. One is for Draw it once, get paid for it multiple ways.
Yes.
One is for growing the audience before you sell to that audience.
Yes.
And then one is the marketing and the sales of that book are easier with the former rather than the latter. But Brad, what are your thoughts before I do a deep dive on that?
Agreed 100%. And what it is this, I was just writing a piece for webcomics.com earlier today. And as I'm writing this wrap-up paragraph, I said, as we enter the third decade of webcomics, and I realized, holy shit, Dave, we're entering our third decade of webcomics. We've had the 2000s, the 2010s. 2010 to 2020, 2021 starts the third decade of webcomics. And when we first started this back in 2000, the big question was, will people buy a book of a comic they've been reading online for a long period of time? That was a question we asked ourselves in 2000. And the answer we found was yes. And it's one of the few things that has remained constant and consistent throughout those first 2 decades of webcomics, is that people will buy the book of a comic they've been reading online. Part of it is for the archivalness of a book, right? Part of it is that now they've got this book, they've got in their hands an archive proof that this comic happened, so that if it disappears from the web the next day, they still have that book. And part of it is because the ultra high-res reading experience is something they appreciate. You still hear people say, I like to have a book of something that I really enjoyed. Right. So what Brandon is grappling with is a question that we've all grappled with over the last 2 decades. Is somebody going to buy this once they've read it online? And the answer, as you rightfully point out, not only is yes, but not only is it will they do it, it's the best way to approach this, because you're doing audience building that way. And now if you've been putting out your work on the web for so long, you've got a built-in audience that's going to bring that Kickstarter to bear and launch it in a superior way. You're going to have people that are going to help spread the word on social media for you. You're going to have everything in place, and they're not only going to support it, but in other words, they're not going to support it in spite of reading it on the web. They're going to support your book because they've been reading it on the web.
Yes. And that led to my third point, which is the marketing and sales is easier because the proof of concept has already been made.
Yes.
The hook has already been hooked. You have pulled them in successfully to keep them coming back week after week, month after month. So if anything, it's like Brad sealing the deal poorly with roses. It's like you've already done the hard work to make the relationship work.
Yes.
Now you're just sealing the deal and you're pointing to the bottom of the stem of your roses and saying, buying this book. I love stories like that, by the way. There's always a story of, it's not always, but you always hear these people of like, I proposed to my fiance. I had the waiter slip the ring onto the top of the cheesecake. Yeah. And then the fiance, unfortunately, would eat the ring without noticing it or something because she loved cheesecake. Those kind of stories are delightful to me in terms of the nature of humans and how we can mess things up that are simple,
That's the first thing I do when, if it's a go-to. If you're ever in a social situation, and if you're like me, you tend to be a little bit insecure in social situations, that's a go-to, is to ask a couple how they met or how they got married or something. Everybody's got a good story about how they met or how they proposed. And once you get somebody talking about that, it's obviously something that brings very warm feelings. It's a guaranteed conversation starter.
Yeah, and also, it's one of the rare times in my life, I, who am not very, how do I put this? Not that I'm antisocial, but when I get stuck at a table, because my wife has a lot of events that I have to sit down with people that I've never met before, and it's like a couple, and I'll do that thing. I'll be like, so tell me the story of how you guys met.
Exactly.
And people's face lights up.
Yes.
And you also you get to become Fiddler on the Roof in the sense that you're like, matchmaker, and you're like, you're kind of helping them to rekindle in that moment their relationship.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
like there's something sort of joy-filled about like, so, and you loved her and she loved you and this and that, and bing, bang, bing. And you're like recreating the moment with them. And it's really quite special. Yeah. But anyway, so.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, though. You're talking about your passion.
Yeah. And so anyway, so jumping back into this topic, sorry to skip the rails there. So for me too, I want to focus on drawing something once and getting paid for it multiple ways.
Yes.
I can't emphasize enough how foundational this is for making a living as a cartoonist online, especially. And frankly, in print. I mean, unfortunately, one of the reasons why we see silver golden age cartoonists having to go on to GoFundMe is they got paid for it once.
Yeah.
And then they never got paid for it again. So even if they created a multi-million dollar character that went on to have movies, they got paid for that thing once. So in our careers, Brad and I have tried to structure it so you draw something once, you get paid for it at the point of creation when it appears on the web, either through ads or print sales or Patreon, right?
Yes.
You get paid for it when the book is collected, through Kickstarter, through book sales at conventions, through this and that. You get paid for it down the line when someone buys the original art. All these different ways where you can draw the thing once. You spent 1 hour on it, 8 hours on it, but now that thing continually keeps making money for you. And that's why I think doing the book in stages, bing, 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 building it like foundational bricks so that you eventually have your, what's the other word for pyramid? Ziggurat? Is that the word?
Yes. It's a great
I love that word.
Good,
I don't know why
crossword word.
I don't know why that popped into my head, but instead of saying pyramid, I wanted to say ziggurat.
Yeah, and meanwhile, all those other things that you had listed there for your B scenario, concept art, sketches, storyboards, sneak peeks, all that other kind of stuff, save that because that makes fantastic value add material for your book.
And
right?
for
That's all
Patreon.
Stuff, yes. Oh, yeah, definitely for Patreon. But that's all stuff that you can add in your book. There's a lot of people that they think, oh, well, I people aren't going to buy just the book. And by the way, we've already proven that's not the case. They're going to buy the book, even though they read it. But if it helps you, if it assuages your fears, to put a few pages of concept art and stuff like that, not only is it going to make you feel better, but some of your fans are actually going to appreciate that.
I also want to talk a little bit about the same thing that keeps someone sitting at a casino slot machine is the same thing that will keep you drawing when you update on a regular basis, which is you get that little serotonin hit of the email or the tweet that says, love today's update. Yeah. Oh, I love what you did in panel 3, right? But if you save all those up and only release them in one final blah when the book comes out, you don't get those little positive reinforcements as you go. And frankly, you also don't get the tiny, if you're willing to listen to the good voices, editorial feedback that you get that's like, oh, I don't understand why this character would do this. Well, you work that in the next couple of pages. Or I don't understand why this plot twist would have gone this way. Well, you maybe explain that a little bit better in the next exposition moment that comes up in the story. Or not. But what I'm saying is there sometimes are editorial feedback moments that you can take in and incorporate into the story as you go.
Absolutely. Dave, this actually brings us, and since we're talking about print products and merchandising and so forth, it brings us to a question I've been hoping that we get around to. So I'm just going to segue right into it. This comes in from Mark Ashworth, who asks, listen, he says, postage and shipping is climbing, and it seems even more so if you agree to sell copies overseas. What if you found a local printer in a foreign country and print and ship from there to any customers or distributors within that nation? Would it replace one problem with a larger problem? In other words, what he's saying is, all of us, and we're all in the same boat. We do a print run. Now we've got the books in our studios and our wherever we keep them. Warehouse, self-storage, etc. Now we've got to send those out to maybe Kickstarter backers who live in the UK or somebody who bought the book and lives in Australia. And that's very, very expensive. It's starting to become cost prohibitive. In fact, I've already heard from some of my Kickstarter backers in recent Kickstarters. They're like, I'm spending more on postage than I'm spending on the Kickstarter.
Yeah, I just had an order. It's funny, I fulfilled it yesterday from New Zealand, and it was a 2-drive book pack that was $75, and the shipping was $74. And I was like, "Dang, I feel bad about that." But what do you do? It's just shipping to New Zealand is shipping to New Zealand.
Well, that's what Mr. Ashworth is saying. His suggestion, and he's spitballing it. He says, "What if you just instead of getting it printed wherever you're getting it printed?" Have it printed, and I'm gonna focus a little bit. In other words, maybe you've got a lot of orders that happen that come from Europe, Germany, France, UK.
Right.
What if you just found a European printer and had a certain number of those books printed there, and then have the printer either ship them directly or have the printer ship them to a distributor who then ships them? What do you think about that approach?
So I think the idea, Mark, that you're getting at, and by the way, I was fascinated enough by your last name, Mark, Ashworth, that while Brad was talking, I was looking it up, because for a split second I thought, oh, Ashworth, that must mean some form of blacksmith or, the creation of ash.
Yeah.
Nope, totally wrong. Old English word, ash meaning ash trees and worth meaning a settlement. Middle English, Old English meaning of settlement. So anyway, Mark, there you go. Sorry about that. I don't know why I had to bring that up. Not at all relevant. Okay, so to me, it's a great idea. It only works at scale, and it only works at a scale that most of us don't have.
Yeah.
There are two different ways to do it, Mark. There's the way you mentioned where you could contract out or subcontract out to different printers around major geolocations. So one within the EU, one within maybe the Oceania of Australia and New Zealand, one within North America, right? You could do that and sell. But that method only works if you have 1,000 customers in Europe, 1,000 customers in New Zealand and Australia, 1,000 customers in the U.S. And you might not, right? It's. I'll tell you this.
I sure don't.
I sure don't. For 70% of my audience, maybe 80% of my audience is in the U.S. Another 5 to 10%, depending on how you do the numbers, is in Canada, and then the rest is dispersed within the rest of the English-speaking world. So trying to find 1,000 people in Australia, or trying to find 1,000 people in Belgium, or wherever you want to pick your spot, it's really tricky. But so there's that method, Mark. And so I think a great idea, only works at scale. The other method is called drop shipping, where you print it in one place, but different pallets go to different spots in the world. Sometimes skirting VAT, value-added tax, in a way that I don't quite understand.
Yeah.
Sometimes incorporating value-added tax as it transits across borders. Sometimes shipping from the point of origin of the production. So if you produce in Canada, or if you produce in China, or you produce in Vietnam, you drop ship from that country to all places around the world.
Right.
And I will say this in a way that's not necessarily complimentary for the way the Chinese have set it up, is a lot of companies do drop shipping from China because China has a little bit skirted the International Postal Union rules, and they kind of subsidize shipping from China. And that's intentional. That's intentional to get their exporters the ability to do drop shipping. But sometimes it's to cartoonist benefit. I know a lot of people that drop ship from China to places around the world. So if it costs me, let's say, $50, $60 to ship from the U.S. to Europe, a certain 1 or 2 book pack, from China, it would cost me $25 to $35. Sometimes because they take it by rail from China to Europe. Sometimes it's because they ship directly from China, so you're not paying any boat fees to get that pallet onto a boat over to Seattle or New York or wherever it's going to be, and then transited to you. And then also because the postal rates are slightly subsidized by the Chinese government, and so they are cheaper on that front. But Brad, I've been talking too much.
Well, no, but that opens up a whole new can of worms, because I was trying to find a way to make this work. It's like, okay, let's really give this a fair shot. The problem with drop shipping, which I also considered, Dave, is that once let's say you have your books printed in China, and you're going to have one pallet sent back to you at your studio so you can ship them out. You're going to have another pallet sent to Europe to distribute to your European customers. Okay. Right. The problem with that is, who's going to accept that delivery? Now you have to insert a middleman. And remember, all of webcomics, all of independent comics has been about surviving by eliminating the middleman. Now you've got to bring a middleman, a distributor, into your process. They've got to accept the shipment. You've got to trust that they're going to accept the shipment, that they're not going to screw things up, lose the book, have the books damaged. Then
By the way, someone who's most likely 5,000 miles away from you that you've never met before, right?
Right. takes a lot of trust.
Yeah.
And now they've got to be responsible for the correct packaging, the correct logistics, the correct crossing this person off the list. Now this person got their book, this person got their book, so on and so forth. And they've got to get that book into the right hands. You just gave up all of the money that you saved by drop shipping, and you spent a bunch more.
Yes. Yeah.
And you don't have any control over that system. And until it would be a really interesting, you know how Topatico kind of grew out of necessity from the people. What was the name of that group? Dumbrella originally, right? And it grew from a bunch of independent cartoonists that were solving a problem for themselves. If a similar thing happened, for example, in Europe, where somebody started a distributor and really, built it up to the point that they had a couple of years of experience where you could say, oh yeah, these people have been trustworthy enough to do this thing. I'm going to trust them with a portion of my fulfillment. Yeah, maybe. But again, you're bringing a third party in, and that's going to cost money. And you're honest to goodness, in terms of cost effectiveness, you're much, much better off having those books shipped all the way across. Let's say you're like Dave's example, China or South Korea, Vietnam. You're
or
much
shipped
better
down from
off
Canada.
having them shipped, all the way over to your place. Put them in your warehouse, put them in your storage, and then shipping them right back out the way they came in certain cases, right back out to New Zealand and Australia and so forth. It's actually more cost effective to do that.
Yeah, I increasingly think that it is more cost effective to do that, because the one thing we didn't talk about is, okay, so you've shipped out all your Kickstarter books, for example, right? All those books are out the door, but now there's, let's say, 1,000 copies left. Those still need to get shipped to you, most likely, because you're going to need to sell them from your store, or from when you go to Comic-Cons, or from when you do book signing. You need those physical copies in your life. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So you're just adding complication. Now, listen. Again, it can be done. It is a good idea, but scale is not our friend. Scale is where this fails.
Yes.
So if you're Matt Inman, great. If you're Penny Arcade, great. Drop shipping can work for you. Region-specific production can work for you. At a scale that I have made work for my business, it is better to own and control all the stages of the process as much as I can. Yeah. And to Brad's point, reduce the middleman. That's how I stay in business, is that I own and control all the stages. And I know that someone I trust, me, is in control of it. Because one other thing that Brad didn't mention, that I didn't mention, is that the sizes of companies that you will get that will deal with the scale that you and I have in our industries are the same size companies that tend to fail 2 to 3 years from now, or tend to have all sorts of problems that you don't really want to get into.
Yeah.
I have walked down paths and gotten burned and pulled it back, and I've learned the lesson the hard way, that it is better for me to trust myself and own and control the stages of warehousing, own and control the stages of distribution, own and control the stages of transportation. I know that sounds stupid, but I've gotten burned in many small ways over 20 years by this or that company failing, or someone proving untrustworthy, because if they were, for lack of a better phrase, if they were good at what they were doing with distribution, they would be working at a bigger scale. Or if they were good at what they were doing with warehousing, they'd be dealing with bigger scale customers.
That's the unfortunate truth.
It is unfortunately the case. Yeah. So, and again, really to own and control all the aspects of your career that you can has proven to be one of the better things that Brad and I have done all along the way.
Absolutely.
Because whenever there's a mistake, too, it's a manageable size mistake that I know, can control, can learn from, and usually financially manage in a way that's better than if someone else made the mistake on my behalf.
As opposed to having 1,000 books somewhere in Europe that now you've got to figure out a way to get back into your control.
Exactly. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. no worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, I'm going to keep this topic rolling, and I've got another great question about book publishing and book printing. So this one comes in from $5 Patreon backer Casper, who you are aware of, I'm sure, if you're in the ComicLab Discord server. Casper is a wonderful member of our community over there. And Casper says, you have both talked about your decisions to do color and monochrome for your projects. I really like the look of monochrome or limited palette. Monochrome or limited palette comics, but I always hesitate to do it with my own work because it almost always seems like a waste, not visually, mind you, but printing-wise. Printing any amount of color means you have to do color printing, which costs so much more. And it's very hard for me to reconcile that. It's a mentality that tells me, well, if I have to pay this much anyway, shouldn't I be going all the way to take advantage of it? So I never do it because I convince myself it has to be full color to be worth it. Dave, have you ever struggled with this? By the way, this is my own words here. Dave's Drive series is all monochromatic, meaning that it's got black ink and what I would say is blue ink, but it's all black and blue, basically. It's the only colors you see. Same thing with Erica Moen, whose Oh Joy Sex Toy series uses black and pinks, okay? But going back to Casper's question, am I being conscientious about my business or am I overthinking? So, Dave, this goes primarily out to you. The main question is, if I'm going to go monochrome, why don't I just go all the way and go full color? I'm paying for it anyway.
Yeah, there's a kind of a fun thought here that you're like, if I'm paying for all these colors with this 4-color plate, I want them to invent colors. Yes. Where's my Schmello? Yes. Where's Kabloo? I want new colors. I want all the colors. So I see where this question is coming from. Yeah. And at least in my understanding of a 4-plate process 4-color process, is the following. And Brad, you can correct me because I actually think that your specialty is more attuned to this than mine. But let's say, for example, that I'm doing a monochromatic Drive story that's in blue, right? Mm-hmm. So here's the thing. It is not technically K, right? It's not black. So it is a color, but that does not mean they have to run all 4 plates, nor does it mean they have to mix anything. They can load one pre-mixed blue onto a plate and ba-doom, 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 then you get the whole span of blue, right? So there also are certain blues that you can only get by a mix. Mm-hmm. And so you have to do 1 plate, 2 plate, right? So you can talk to your printer about what are the limitations, what are the spectrums that I can do, can't do, that kind of thing. There's also, if like for Erica Moen, when she runs a black and a red plate, basically, she can custom load those colors. And so she's got a 2-plate process. She's not paying for 4 different plates, 4 different colors. She's paying for 2 different colors. And I think the same is true of the novel Blankets, if you remember that one, Brad. I think that one was memory might be failing me, but I think that was a 2-color process. So what I'm saying is you can limit your inks and still create amazing colors, by the way. With blacks and reds, you can create some interesting color spectrums. With Blankets, I think they had some interesting mixes between the 2 colors. And there's all sorts of things with packaging, like having worked in packaging in Mattel for a number of years, there would be times where we would limit our color palette intentionally to save a few $1,000 in the printing. And that's more the case when you're printing 40,000, 50,000 packages. If you can remove one of the plates from the process, you save a significant chunk of money. It's kind of surprising. But Brad, I may have gotten things wrong, so I open it back up to you. What did I get wrong? What do you think needs course correction from how I described it?
I'm over here biting my lip. And actually, I'll open by saying this. You actually brought back a wonderful memory from my years in newspapers, where I remember a couple times when I tried to do kind of a limited palette illustration, and I thought the page looked beautiful, and the editor would come back and literally say, I'm paying for full color on this page. I want to see full colors. And I'd have to go back and add to make sure that this editor saw reds and greens and blues. I just egregiously, or
Right, but in that case, they were already set up for 4 plates,
yeah.
right?
Oh yeah. I'm just saying you brought back a memory.
Yeah.
Speaking of being already set up for 4 plates, the printer that you're gonna probably be using for your book is probably already set up for 4 plates. And unless you are printing a large number of books, like blankets, for example, if you're printing in the 10,000s, then they will go back to that press, because what you're also asking them to do is you're going to tell them mix up a Pantone, whatever the number is for your shade of blue. They've got to mix that color now and set that up on their presses, whereas the presses are already set up to go CMYK. Just asking you directly, Dave, when you send your plates, are you sending them like 2 plates and telling them to mix up a certain Pantone color?
I am, yeah. And so with Drive, what I send them is actually a black file. So it's black line art with black gradations, black shading. Mm-hmm. And I say, print this black plate, but with, I don't know what it was, Pantone 435C, right? Which is 435 coded Pantone. And then they mix up that 435 Pantone. They run 1 plate, ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk. So then I'm printing 1 color. It's surprisingly not affordable, but it's certainly better than if I was doing four plates.
Okay, so in terms of your cost effectiveness, it's not as expensive.
Yeah, and also one thing to also consider is that modern printing has gotten much better with four color plates, but there's still the tiniest possibility you could have a slight misregistration between your cyan and your magenta.
Oh, yeah.
So if I was trying to produce my Drive colors between a mix of a cyan and magenta or a cyan and a black or whatever plate I would have needed to mix, there could be a tiny 1/16 of a misregistration on the plate, and then everything looks a little wonky. It's not the worst thing in the world. And what I mean by misregistration, for those of you that might not know, is think of comics that, what's his name, the painter would spoof?
Lichtenstein.
Lichtenstein, thank you. Where the Ben-Day dots would be slightly off, and the red would be slightly off from the black, or that kind of thing. You can think about it in your mind of the 50s and 60s, and sometimes even into the 70s. They had a lot of registration problems. But it mainly got fixed in the 80s thanks to USA Today. Am I right about that?
Yeah. USA Today forced everybody to get much, much better at registration, particularly because if they would have it printed in cities all across the nation. And if you wanted that very lucrative USA Today contract, you had to hold within like a 16th of a micron.
Yeah, they actually had you run through a quality test, didn't they?
Yes,
they basically took the McDonald's model of like licensees that have to prove a certain quality level and have to buy into certain materials. And then they would license you the ability to produce USA Today in Seattle or Chicago or whatever it was, that kind of thing.
But I think today, like today's book printers, technology is just such that, like back in the day, they were literally with a hammer adjusting these plates, pushing them into place.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I saw them do it with a ball peen hammer. Now they're doing it digitally, so registration is much less of an issue. But you're absolutely valid in being in keeping an eye out for that. So I think what Dave is saying is absolutely accurate. I will add, you want to talk to your printer first, because if your printer is basically set up to do full CMYK work, they might not be ready for this.
Right, and they might not want to deal with mixing their own Pantones. They might be like, to hell with you, I'm not.
Yeah.
Especially, and this is where scale comes in again. If you're only producing like 500 books, they're not going to produce, or they might, but they're most likely not going to produce their own Pantone color for you, a special Pantone, that kind of thing.
So follow Dave's lead on this. And I mean, out of the two of us, he's the only one that's got experience having done this. If he's saying that it's less expensive than doing a full CMYK print run, then you got to, there's nobody who knows this stuff better. What I will say is this, one last thought, and that is you are going to probably be doing this through a Kickstarter.
Yeah.
You're going to have all of your costs, no matter what they are, covered by Kickstarter.
Yes.
In other words, if your readers are going to support it, and by the way, we're talking about maybe a couple $1,000s if you're depending on the scale that you're printing at, and if they support up to a certain point, they'll certainly cover that other point. my main question to you, Casper, is why are you worried about costs at all? I mean, obviously you don't want to be, printing this on gold leaf paper, but in general, your costs are covered.
Well, yeah, but there's also a general thing is you want to offer a certain affordable level in your Kickstarter. So even I completely take your point, and Brad is right that you should have worked out the math so that it's basically underwritten entirely by the Kickstarter, therefore not a problem. But you might want to say like, oh, you know what? A $19 book is much more affordable to the average person than a $25 book or a $29 book, that kind of thing. So Casper might be saying that to themselves,
Yeah, Casper. Well, and not only that, but I coming to this main point, the point that is being suggested is, hey, if I'm going to do monochrome, I might as well do the whole thing. And I guess maybe that's also why I'm bringing Kickstarter up, because in taking that whole idea of cost off the table, what you can do then is say, what is the best visual presentation of this book? Is it black and white, monochrome, or CMYK? No matter what it is, that should be your focus. What's the best book?
Yes, exactly. And that's actually wanted to be my final point for me, is that if your thought is, well, like, is color or monochrome better for this project? That's the answer. That's the way you go. And I will be honest that color is almost invariably the better answer. Yeah. The public, the reading public, myself, yourself, everybody responds better to a full color story than to, especially compared to a black and white story, and even compared to a monochromatic or limited palette story. Although, no, I'll take that back. Sometimes the aesthetics of a monochromatic or limited palette are exciting, but most people respond really well to a full color story. And in fact, when Drive is done, I may, Brad, go back and hire someone to color the entire run and do a full color Drive. I may. Really? I mean, I'm taking a page from Jeff Smith on this one. Jeff has been a real North Star for my own career. I like to see what he's done to basically resell the same book multiple ways. Yeah. And if he could sell Bone in floppies, sell Bone in trades, sell Bone as that giant Bible version that he has that is the size of a brick. And then he went back and had Steve Hammaker do the color version of Bone, came out beautiful, resold that multiple ways as trades, as floppies, as, this. And so Jeff has really been smart in the way he has come back to the same work. But again, none of us are Bone. So I'm taking it as my North Star. We'll see how Drive is doing when I get to the end of the story. If there's anybody left still reading it, maybe I'll consider a color version.
I will say this. The more I become introduced to manga, however, it's very, very common for manga to have maybe the first 2 pages in color and then the rest in black and white. And those books do not have a problem selling whatsoever. They sell very well. So I have to note that just because it's there. Yeah. But in terms of my work, you better believe it. It's in full color.
Yeah. Well, and I want to respond to that because, first of all, that's a great example. Second of all, that exact same thing of first couple of pages are in color, the rest are black and white, is because it's a limit of production ability, right? You can only ask mangaka to do so much in terms of producing these books. Bang, 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 bang. And so, I get why they're like, here's the look and feel of the world if it were in full color. Do you have the sense of everybody's uniforms? Do you have the sense of the world and their superhero costumes? Great. From now on, we're black and white, right? That kind of thing. I get it. It's the same reason why I chose monochromatic for Drive. I knew that I couldn't produce a full color page every week and also do Sheldon and also do all the other admin for my business. I just couldn't do it. Yeah. So I had to go monochromatic.
You had a phrase for that. It was the economics of the possible. It was
the art of the possible, yes. Because quite literally, I could do a full color page of Drive and be done 10 additional years from now rather than doing the monochromatic. And there's nice advantages to doing monochromatic. There's fun artistic things you can get away with that are fun. But it's kind of 2 separate concerns. What's the best color palette for the story, and what's the best color palette for my ability to produce the story? And then I guess a third one, what's the best color palette in terms of the economics of producing this book? And I think we've covered all 3. Yeah?
Absolutely. So, Dave, I've got a question. Listen, we've got so many good book questions. I'm just going to keep it going here. Another question about books. We're going to turn this into a theme show.
We should just title this episode "Books, Books, Books!" Exclamation point.
Books. Yeah, we're jumping around a lot of good book topics. So I've got, but I will tell you this, Dave. This one's going to be a challenge for you. This comes in from a Patreon backer who asks, which platform is best for showing a long-form comic for 8 to 12-year-olds? And why would you pick that platform? When you post on some of these platforms like Webtoons and Tapas, what rights do you give up? Several of our readers say we should be on Webtoons, but we're concerned about age appropriateness. So there's actually a few questions that are packed in there, but the one is going to be the toughie because I think I know what both of our answers going to be. What's the best way to get a book out to 8 to 12-year-olds?
Well, I think my answer is going to be really disappointing to most people because I, coming from such a digital and web-based career, they're thinking, Dave knows the solution. Yeah. And unfortunately, the solution is get a contract with Scholastic, I think.
I got to agree with you.
It's tough because that 8 to 12 range is still heavily edited and overseen by the caretakers of that child. And rightly so. Yeah. You don't want to let an 8-year-old run loose on the internet. They'll find something terrible within a couple of minutes.
Absolutely.
So a lot of what that kid sees... It sounds terrible when you say that kid. A lot of what that kid sees. I don't know why when you say that kid, it makes it sound gruffer. That little shit, what they're going to see is what you're going to give them. But it's kind of true. You know, they are the caretakers in their life, the parents, the guardians, whoever's watching them, usually is the screen between what's out in the world and what they get to see.
Yeah.
And so while absolutely some of these platforms do have some comics for 8 to 12-year-olds, there is a sizable percentage of parents that don't let their kids run free on those systems or don't let them read on those systems because they don't know where the kid will end up if they turn away to make dinner for 10 minutes, you know? Brad, thoughts?
And the other part is, so really it comes down to when is a comic marketable for a young person. And for me, I think that that's when the age, and I bet you we could look up this statistic, the age at which people tend to get their first smartphone, right? Then you've got a shot at that kid because they got a smartphone. They're going to be looking stuff up, right? Yeah, While they've got a tablet, however, number one, the last thing they're doing is trying to find something to read. What they're doing is going to YouTube and watching videos.
Yeah. You know, hey, what's this new Lego game I can play?
Exactly,
that kind of
or video games. Exactly right. So, so that's why if you want to get a book out to that age group, I really do think that it's through print. What's the best platform? Is one that involves paper. Whether that's Scholastic or graphics or whatever, if you want to reach that age group, that's one of the last bastions of print publishing. Your answer is Scholastic or one of the print publishers that specialize in, and by the way, Scholastic had this lockdown years and years and years ago when they started doing those book fairs that would show up at the kid's school, and the kid can go in there and buy all the books that they want at special prices. Listen, they've got it locked down. And again, that young person with the digital device is A, not looking for books, and B, like Dave says, doesn't have a whole lot of latitude in what they can look for. So the first part of your question is, what's the best format? And the answer is one that involves paper.
Yeah. And just so you're not hugely intimidated, Scholastic obviously is not the only game in town. There are others. Even from traditional comic book publishers. I know that Boom has, what is it, Kaboom or Boom for Kids or whatever it's called. They have some imprint like that. So basically, any publisher of size has some smaller imprint within their umbrella that's like, hey, it's just for the 7 to 13-year-olds, that kind of thing. And so you could obviously pitch to them. But I want to, Brad, we've never talked about this. I want to share a forecast that I've had in the back of my mind that I don't know if it's 10 years from now. I don't know if it's 20 years from now. I don't know if it's 30 years from now. But when publishing is on its last gasp, and romance novels have stopped going into print, and science fiction novels have stopped going into print, everybody's reading on their iPad or on their Kindle or whatever. My thought is the last two legs standing under that table for traditional print publishing will be publishing for kids and Bibles. I think those will be the last two bits of print publishing that'll survive.
Yeah.
And so, because parents want their kids to hold the physical object. I mean, there's a reason why Steve Jobs wouldn't let his own kids play with an iPad, because he knew, he's like, nah, that's not what you want. You want to give them a book. You don't want to give them an iPad. And so I think a lot of parents still intuitively know that a book is a better way for a child to read than an iPad. And so they still want to give them a physical object. And I think when all of the last gasps of publishing are there, it will be Bibles and kids publishing that are still being printed, and that's it.
I think you're absolutely right. Now, taking on the other aspects of the question that Kathy brought up, what rights do you give up? I'm not going to go on a deep dive on this, and for two reasons. Number one, those change from time to time, and so anything I say may not be relevant to someone who listens to this podcast next month.
And they're contract specific too.
Yes,
even within the same publisher.
So, and here we're talking, Webtoons and Tapas and so forth, but this goes.
You're talking platforms. Sorry, you're talking platforms.
This goes even wider than that. But here's the thing: if you're going to be doing publishing, you need to learn to look up a terms of service file for whatever platform. You need to learn to go through this, and to skim through it and to understand what you're looking at. And we did a show a long time ago where we talked about legal aspects. It might be fun to come around to that again sometime and just talk about reading through a terms of service agreement. But here's what I want you to know. Mainly, in most of these, they're not taking on copyright for your work, except to the degree they need to put it out on their service. In other words, they grant themselves a short-term copyright of your, or short-term licensing is probably the better phrasing to use, so that they can put it out through their different ways of getting it out to tablets and smartphones and so forth. But they're not, in many cases, taking on any long-term rights that exist after you cancel your account with them. What I will say about that is this: Tapastic, which runs Tapas, I got away from them years ago because they did one thing that to me was super underhanded and downright insulting. And what they did was they all of a sudden, without saying anything, poof, at least that was my perception. It seemed like it came out of nowhere, right? All of a sudden, somebody pointed out to me they've got this new thing in their terms of service that says that they now have right of first refusal for any other publishing opportunities that comes up to this artist.
And real quick, Brad, explain what a right of first refusal is, because some people might not know.
First refusal is, because a lot of younger creators off this one. Right of first refusal means that if you get any other offer for publishing, you've got to first take it to the holder of the right of first refusal. In this case, it would have been Tapas, and they have an opportunity to match that offer, and then you'll be doing it through them. The problem with that is a lot of these rights of first refusal contracts are vague. So it doesn't say, for example, how long that the company would have to match that other offer, right, or, how much they have to match it or better it by. There's also like this idea, if Scholastic wants to do it, Tapastic could match that offer on paper, but are they going to have the reach of Scholastic? No. And by the way, it said match the first offer, not improve on the first offer. Right. So there's a lot of problems with the right of first refusal clause in a contract. Now, when people started exposing this and calling Tapastic on it, and this, I don't know whether you remember this, Dave. This is absolutely, I remember this very clearly. Their response is, well, listen, we see so many artists making mistakes with their business. We decided to write that into the terms of service so that we could prevent artists from making mistakes in their contracts.
That's nice. Because if there's one thing that business is known for is altruism. So that's nice. Yep. I think that's really sweet of them.
On that day, I canceled my account with Tapastic, and I never turned back. I never even considered, because if they can do that once, they're capable of doing it again, and they've learned their lesson. They got to find a sneakier way to do it,
right?
Or at least that's my perception.
When they wrapped it into like, oh, we're not interested in the money, we're not interested in the control, we just want to help these young kids.
They got so upset seeing people make what they consider to be the wrong decision for that artist they've never met. Yeah.
Brad, our interest was not business. Our interest is in helping these 20-year-olds that couldn't afford a lawyer to take a look at our terrible terms.
How many meetings in the early 2000s, Dave, did you and I take where the guy sat across the table and said, listen, I've already made my fortune. All I want to do now is help creators find their way.
I actually remember a specific meeting that you and I were at where they said that, and we were like, run, don't walk.
And in my mind, the meeting was over before he got to the period at the end of that sentence. He kept talking, but I was elsewhere. I was mentally watching the lobsters in the tank or whatever else was going on there.
He also had 3 cell phones. Do you remember that? I was like, that's something shady about that.
Fucking table. Laid him right out in case he was going to miss a call.
He's got a burner phone in case the CIA needs to get him. What do you need 3 phones for?
Well, let me take a look at question to make sure we covered everything. What rights do you give up? Yeah, you need to learn how to read a terms of service. But in general, a lot of these aren't, sneaking rights and stuff. A lot of them say we just are giving ourselves a licensing. We need to do our jobs. Several of our readers say we should be on webtoons, but we're concerned about age appropriateness. I don't know that I have a strong feel on that. There's a lot of different content on webtoons. I don't know that I'd worry about age appropriateness. And I'll tell you what, philosophically, and listen, I am definitely not somebody who writes for an 8 to 12 audience. But philosophically, Dave, out of all the things I worry about, worrying about somebody who's going to read my thing on a certain platform and find something else that's not age appropriate, that's up to that young person's parents to look out for.
Right.
I don't know that that's my business.
That's not your responsibility,
or to make the decision what I think is or isn't age appropriate for that other kid.
No, I agree with that. It is not your responsibility. What I was trying to communicate was not that it's a matter of responsibility, but more that putting your work in a world that makes a parent have to do more work can limit your potential audience. That's what I was trying to say. Because all parents just want to know, like, there's a reason why common sense media exists, and it's because people just want to know, like, what are my kids going to see? What is this thing? I don't know. And then they check it out and that sort of thing. Parents just, whether it's their church, whether it's their school, whether it's some trusted source, they just want to have somebody tell them, look, let your kids read this. It's not going to turn them into serial killers. Okay, great. That's the thing, that. So, Brad, I want to jump us into the next topic because this is kind of fun. A friend of mine, Fred Schroeder, the director of Stripped, the co-director of Stripped, sent along a commercial that he got from at the back of a Marvel book. And I guess it's Conan leaning in the corner.
That's Conan.
Is that Conan? And so Conan's leaning in with a double-headed battle axe and a shield, and he's saying, John Buscema wants new students. New York class in comic book art. Also, new course in comic book writing. Stan Lee, guest lecturer. For details, send name and address to John Buscema, P.O. Box 1827, FDR Station, New York, New York. Right, so there's all the details following, but it's basically an ad for John and Stan Lee to teach you a class in comic book writing and comic book drawing. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is, in our mind, in our secret sort of wish fulfillment of what comics can be, we're like, well, those guys were millionaires. They drove around in solid gold cars. Stan Lee had a solid gold car, surely. And yes, there were points in Stan's career where he had a lot of money. There were points in his career where he had a lot of money. There were also a lot of points in both of their careers where they were stone cold broke and doing their best to keep their head above water. And this class, to me, reeks of 2 comics creators that are like, how do we make a quick buck? All right, we're going to ask Marvel if we can put a tiny ad in the back, and Stan probably approved it because he was the editor-in-chief. And he's like, that we don't pay a lot of money for this ad. We'll reach a few thousand people. We'll teach this class. We'll charge them, I don't know, $100 a pop in 1975. That'll cover the rent in New York this month. All right, great. It's just interesting to me that the image that we have is that, well, Stan went on to make millions with Marvel. Well, Marvel also went bankrupt more times than we can count.
Oh, yeah. And there was the whole period in the 80s where Stan was desperately trying to get something happening with Marvel properties on TV and movies. There were many failed shows like the Spider-Man television show, the Captain America show, mainly because technology and special effects just hadn't gotten to that place yet where they could do it well, and the resulting visuals were disappointing, to say the least.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really important to remember that everybody had their struggle. I got to ask now, were you a comic book fan in the 80s? Were you following this?
In the 80s, the end of the 80s, I would have been a comic book follower, yeah.
Did you ever see that ad in the back of so many of those comics that we read that advertised the Joe Kubert School of Comics and Cartooning?
Was that the Turtle and the Pirate?
No, that was the art correspondence course, which my parents actually enrolled me in.
They didn't.
I honestly, oh my God, it was.
I did not know this story. Oh my God! All right.
I drew Tippy the Turtle and sent it in, and of course they told me that I had.
Of course,
I was slopping over with potential.
It's not that you were a mark, Brad. That wasn't the case.
And they sent this person out, this traveling salesperson, come out. And signed my parents to a contract that I would get this correspondence course come through the mail month after month after month. And then I would do the assignment, mail it in, and then they would mail back what I had drawn with a sheet of tracing paper over it, and then little notes from a teacher saying, do this differently, you could do that differently, here's a suggestion, here's a suggestion. The apex of that time was one of the instructors there was the woman who was the inspiration for the little redheaded girl in Charles Schultz's Peanuts.
Oh, really?
Yes. Well, and I talked to her on the phone once. She was a delight.
Didn't Schultz himself take a correspondence course in cartooning?
I think he became a teacher for a short
and then he taught there. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I think it might be the same one because it was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But after a little while, after several months, I was starting to outgrow it. But they had my parents sign a contract for several years.
What?
And we had to go through a little bit of a tussle to get out of it. So it did not end up being a super happy experience for me at the time.
The economics of that business are fascinating. That they basically had, like, if some salesperson had to drive up to Bad Axe, Michigan, and drive to the Geiger household, what was that business model?
Walked right in, sat at the dining room table,
took off a little fedora. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Geiger. My name is Tim Stevens. I'm here to.
If you've ever seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, it would have been Jack Lemmon's character walking into the dining room table.
Hold Gil needs a win. Come on, sign this contract.
yeah. But yeah, that was my experience, but I desperately wanted to go to the Joe Kubert School of comic book art, which I think is over in New Jersey. I'm closer to it now than I ever was because it specialized in comic book art, and it had a bunch of familiar names like John Buscema. I don't know whether he was one of the instructors, but I had all names that I had recognized, and I desperately wanted to go to that school.
Well, and as a lover of cartoon history, I have a couple of books actually on my shelf, behind this laptop that I'm talking to you through. There's a couple of books of either that were, for lack of a better phrase, pulling together and anthologizing these how-to courses that would have been correspondence, and then they sold on the book, right? Which is a sort of a value add of draw it once, get paid for it multiple ways. Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating how many times throughout history it's like, are you good at drawing? Cartooning is the way to make dollars.
Oh, yes.
That's right. The Saturday Evening Post is buying, and they're looking for cartoonists like you. And it's fascinating to see. But this is the kind of book that Mort Walker would have read and got really excited and taught him how to send away to New York publishers. And anyway, what I'm getting at, though, is that this thing with Stan Lee and John Buscema caught my eye because cartooning has always been a struggle for the vast majority of people and will ever be thus. Mm-hmm. But you don't go into it for the money. If I say this time and again, we all have better ways to make money had we wanted to do that. But one of the reasons why I love comics is I get to tell the stories. And because I've structured the business the way I have, I get to own and control it. I am my own editor. I write what I want to write. I say what I want to say. I draw what I want to draw. It is a really wonderful life. But it is nice to have reminders that even Stan Lee and even John Buscema had some troubles in their journey towards that Marvel, Marvel Studios. It wasn't always thus. It was
wasn't
some tough
all
years.
red carpets and after movie parties.
Yeah, and posing on a red carpet going, Excelsior, true believers.
Oh, my God, yes. Well, listen, speaking of reaching the Excelsior part of a podcast, you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my pal Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend, the lovable, huggable Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped, cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
Fantastic. I'm also involved. I'm teaching classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the Marymount Community College. Give me a call, Stan Lee. Classes start at $25. And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that like John Buscema pitching his own class. patreon.com/comiclab.
Poor John.
Poor John.
Poor John. One of the best artists Marvel Comics ever produced, but really didn't have a personality for the big screen.
God love him. Not a talker. Not a talker, John Buscema.
Mr. Lee, I can't tell you how excited I am to be in your class. I really want you to give me your best advice on writing.
Oh, fantastic. Grab a seat. Yeah, you go ahead and take the front row. That's fine. Welcome to the class. Fantastic to have you. Excelsior. All right. So my first tip on writing to the whole class, and I hope I have all of your eyes pointed up here at me because I'm Stan Lee. All right. Fantastic. The first tip on writing I have for you is to get out your checkbooks and write down Stan Lee at the addressee and write $300 on the price amount. That's fantastic. All right. Old Stan's got to make his rent this month. Turns out
sure
Marvel's
you write
going.
Your signature in the bottom right-hand corner.
That's right. I'm going to teach you how to write that check out very quickly. Old Stan's in some hot water. We're in our third bankruptcy this year for Marvel Comics.